Audio on demand from Vision Christian Media.
You're listening to Momentum, a show that helps men succeed in life. And as we delve into this week's topic, a reminder that some of the content may be of a sensitive nature. Now, here's your host, Des Kennedy.
Hi, welcome to another edition of Momentum. And just before we get into today's show, let me remind you of our website, momentumaustralia.org. And let me remind you of our care line, 1-800-000-MEN. Guys, don't do life on your own. If you need a safe and confidential conversation, you can call our care line 9 a.m. to 11 p.m. 7 days a week. That's 1-800-000-MEN. Easy to remember. And also don't forget our social media. So we're on TikTok, we're on YouTube, we're on Instagram. Please like those as well. Now today, in fact, over the next 2 weeks, we're going to be talking to a really lovely guy by the name of Peter Jackel. And Peter is a really, really interesting guy because he stood for the seat of Cowper in the federal election and for the Family First Party. And so the reason for the discussion is, what do Christian men do in terms of, Christianity and politics? And then there's all sorts of issues that sit in there, like, governments are appointed by God. How does that sit alongside democracy? There's all sorts of issues that we'll get into with Peter because he's an expert in this subject. Peter, welcome to Momentum.
I'm not an expert. Des, thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me along. It's been
it's really good that you're here. So tell us a bit about yourself, I guess, just, for a couple of minutes, tell us a bit about your life.
Yeah, sure thing. Well, I come from an IT background. Married the lovely Miss Samantha back in 1988. So we've been married for quite a few years, raised 5 children down in Melbourne, principally. And then during COVID...
Are they normal?
The kids normal?
No, I haven't grown up in Melbourne.
No, that's right. We have to shield them and from all of the dangers of Melbourne.
Yeah.
But yeah, we after COVID hit, we fled the state, pretty much, and came up to New South Wales and purchased a farm.
Right.
And so prior to fleeing, I actually was a pastor of a church. So I looked after a small community and did that for a number of years, about 7 or 8 years.
Did you enjoy that?
Yeah, I did, but I tell you what, it's one of the toughest jobs, toughest gigs around.
Yeah, who would be a pastor?
Yeah. I mean, you've got the pressures, the practical pressures, of looking after people's needs.
Yeah,
and people can be very needy. Then you've got the spiritual pressures as well.
Of course,
and we live in as you know, we live in a very a heightened spiritual environment, and so we have that to contend with as well as pastors.
And you've got so many flavors of Christianity too, so that's from evangelical sort of like Baptist or Brethren and so forth, right through to charismatic and so forth, and you could have every one of those areas within your congregation, couldn't you?
That's right. And that's one of the great challenges is trying to navigate theologically everybody's different views on just about everything. So you put 3 Christians together and you're going to get 4 opinions, as they say, right?
So that's true. So I mean, that's a great setting for the background. So you came up to New South Wales, and then you found an interest in politics. What was the driver for you?
Yeah, well, the fundamental driver for me is my Christian faith. And I believe that as Christians, we have a mandate by God to influence those around us. And whether you want to think about it on a micro scale, which is your family, your friends, your colleagues, work with, to a macro scale, and let's talk about the wider community and the state, and then perhaps even the nation.
Yeah.
And so where you can, you are to move within the realm of influence, the spheres of influence that you have, and to share Christ and to actually induce change in the culture, if that's possible.
And that's very important, right? Because the Great Commission is go into all the world and reach people with the gospel, make disciples, essentially.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
And that's a Great Commission. But sitting alongside that, you need to have the environment that allows you to do that.
Yeah, well, that's right.
Right, so that's where the politics side comes in, I guess.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So and just on that, Matthew 28, it says, go therefore into all the world, making disciples, and people often, and baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. People often stop there with that scripture.
Yeah.
But if you read the next little bit and tack it on, what's been tacked on, it says, Jesus says, and teach them to obey all of my words.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
So that means bringing people into an understanding of the words of Christ and the way that he demands and teaches us that we should live life.
Yes, the fundamental life principles, and we know what a lot of those are, and
That's
you know,
right.
and I guess we'll get into those in a little minute. So I guess the initial question is, you know, there's a lot of Christian people, Christian men in particular, who shy away from being interested in politics, either as a participant in voting or, I mean, you've got Jehovah's Witnesses who don't vote at all, which is one end of the spectrum, I guess. And then you have, you know, Christians who are actively involved and not only vote, but people like yourself who actually stand up and say, hey, I'm happy to be held accountable for. Talk a little bit about that, about your decision to get involved in that.
Yeah. Well, again, I think if you understand the mandate upon your life is to preach Christ and influence culture, then we have a responsibility before God to actually walk that out and act that out.
Yeah.
And so that's in every part of our life, whether it comes to voting or whether it comes to participation in politics. And here's why we should be involved in politics. So the very first thing about our lives, the most fundamentally important thing about our lives is the call upon our lives to preach Christ, to be able to reveal Christ, to be able to share Christ, to be able to speak about Christ. So that's the number one most important thing about our lives as Christians. The second most important thing about our lives as Christians is that we are able to do number one.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And so if you look around the world today, you'll see number one being pushed back upon by the culture. And laws are being now put in place that are actually stopping people preaching the gospel. We're seeing, you know, really troubling stuff coming out of the UK.
Yeah. I mean, at Hyde Park, for example, it used to be, you know, people would get up on a soapbox in Hyde Park and preach the gospel, right? They're not allowed to do that.
Right.
You know, because it's seen as divisive and it's seen as putting other people down, which is so wrong because you're trying to help people. But yeah, it's interesting that.
That's right. So wherever, so think about the chain of events. We've had same-sex marriage being instituted as law in many of the Western nations, and now the Bible where it speaks about same-sex attraction, if you like, or homosexual activity, or lesbian activity, that's now being deemed as hate speech.
Yes.
And now people who read the Bible are being arrested for the penalty for the crime of hate speech. And so think about that. It started with an idea in a politician's head, being impressed upon by, you know, people that had a particular view, an ideological view, and then that was instituted into law, and then the law governs what you can and can't do in the land, which then impedes your number one most important thing, which is to preach the gospel. And we are to call out sin, but not just the sin of homosexuality, sin, all forms of sin. And if you're being shut down and arrested for the crime of hate speech, well, then you're effectively being shut down in preaching the gospel.
And the same thing is true for, you know, the whole discussion around gender and, you know, transgender and all that whole area, which we're not going to get into. But I mean, that's the same. Also, abortion is, you know, up there. Euthanasia is up there as, you know, lowering the value of life. You know, and actually, I interviewed somebody yesterday for Devin with Des show who was adopted at 6 weeks into a Christian home. And, you know, he could just as easily have been aborted you know, as a child.
That's right.
But he did. He was born and adopted into a Christian home. And, you know, he was a missionary in Peru for many, many years. And so just that one decision to keep that child alive had repercussions for thousands of people throughout his life.
Yeah, exactly right.
It's amazing, the positive influence of making some smarter decisions.
Right. And so this is where we look at Jesus's picture of talking about, beautiful fruit that grows upon the trees of our lives.
Yeah.
And you can tell a person's life by their fruit. So you can tell a nation's trajectory by the sampling of its fruit, right?
Yeah.
So if we have a nation which is determined to kill its offspring in the womb, then you are growing ugly fruit, which ultimately bears social pathologies in the community and in the society.
Totally.
But here's what I have to remind people of from time to time, and that is that God is a social conservative.
Yes.
God is about traditional nuclear marriage. God is pro-life.
Yes.
God matters. God cares about the unborn life in the womb. God cares about our old people being treated with dignity in the last years of their life and not being euthanized. Yeah. And so this is...
it's absolutely right what you've just said.
And issues obviously around sexuality, and your sexual identity. Well, God is a social conservative. He created man and woman to come together, that they would bear children, and those children would come together with other people's children, and they would bear, more children. Yes. And you have this beautiful generational effect and beautiful fruit growing upon them.
That's a beautiful picture, just the way you've described it.
Yeah,
right?
Isn't it?
And so
it's not complicated.
No, it's not. but society tries to destroy it. Anything that I guess is conservative or is perceived as religious or Christian is frowned upon. The opposite, they believe the opposite must be true.
Yeah, that's right.
No matter what that is, right?
That's right. And exactly right. And you gotta dig a bit deeper on that, right? In what is influencing this move away from the beauty that God, imbues into his creation. And the thing is, you've got a snake that whispers, and his name is Satan. Yeah. And he's determined to destroy everything that's beautiful about God's creation. And that's why you see, the culture moving away from the standards, the values, the principles that God teaches us in the Word of God, and even teaches us through the natural order of creation. Even the Romans chapter 1 in same-sex attraction talks about men gave up their natural affections for women, and instead men with men had sex. Yeah. Okay, so even the natural order of things is challenged by Satan, that you should turn against that. Did
God really say?
Did God really say? Is that echoing question
from Adam and Eve, right? Yeah, it's right. Interesting, isn't it? So, one of the things that people debate, and we'll go to a short break after I have this discussion, is the whole idea of the separation of state from the church.
From church,
right? So, how do we reconcile that in our world?
We don't, Des. We just say a complete... We just say that's a completely rubbish statement that's been designed to shut you up and shut you down as a Christian. Because let's face it, well, first of all, where does that saying come from? It comes from a letter that Jefferson wrote to the Baptist Society in the United States, right? And what he was talking about, he was advocating that the state, i.e. the government, should have no business in the church.
Yes.
Right? So it was actually a letter,
the other way around,
statement that was designed to protect the church from the meddling hands of the government.
Yeah.
And so now it's been used as a cudgel, as a clobber statement, so that you'll shut up as a Christian because you should have nothing to do with government. But hey, everybody that comes into politics and comes into government ultimately brings with them a worldview.
Exactly.
So, we should perhaps say that if we're going to say that Christians can't bring their worldview into politics, we should maybe say atheists, you can't bring your worldview into politics.
Or the Muslim community.
Or Buddhists or Muslims.
Yeah.
Right? But the truth is, and we know this intuitively by the way people approach issues, is that they are bringing to bear their worldview. And so we as Christians have every right to bring the Christian worldview, which we believe and can argue has coherence to reality and has coherence to beauty ultimately, that things prosper, things thrive when they're done God's way. And looking at all of the issues
So we're going to take a short break. It's a great conversation. We're going to come back and talk more around this subject. And we haven't even started to get into it yet. And so just while we're on the break, guys, don't forget the website, momentumaustralia.org. Don't forget our Caroline 1-800-000-MEN. That's 1-800-000-636. And don't forget our social media channels as well. And we'll be back shortly.
You're listening to Momentum, a show that helps men succeed in life. Find out more at momentumaustralia.org.
If this program has highlighted something you'd like prayer for, we'd love to pray for you. Call 1-800-PRAY-FOR-ME. That's 1-800-772-936. It's a free call. Or text 0401 132 888.
You're listening to Momentum, a show that helps men succeed in life. Find out more at momentumaustralia.org. Now, here's your host, Des Kennedy.
Hi, we're back with Momentum, and we have Peter Jackel with us today. And we're talking about Christian and politics. And, in the first part of the show, we talked about why it is important for Christians to be interested in politics and why they should get involved necessarily with politics. But I want to ask Peter the question, and I guess we all struggle with it a bit, and that is, how should Christians vote in an election? Because, I guess our tendency would be to vote for the major parties because they think that's where we should be voting, perhaps. What is your view around that, Peter?
Well, okay. So I think it's a values proposition that we're talking about when you're voting for people and putting them into Parliament, because ultimately they're going to be people that are going to impact your life very directly. Remember, we talked before about the most important thing is to share Christ. The second thing is to being enabled to be able to do number one, share Christ. Right? That's the second most important thing. So if you're voting for major parties and part of their policy platform is to legislate values which are opposed to yours, then why would you put those people into power just because they're part of a mainstream party? I think instead you need to be, or we as Christians need to be looking for parties which closely align to our views as Christians with the intention of trying to raise them into positions of power. And we have a unique system in Australia with the Westminster system where the Senate, with enough representatives, can actually hold government to account, even if the mainstream party is trying to push bad laws. A number of senators can have the power to actually halt the government in its tracks and force them to amend the legislations, the harmful things they're trying to do potentially.
And we certainly have in Australia a number of senators who would take a almost Christian worldview, if I could put it that way. I'm thinking Jacinda Price, I'm thinking of others there who, do have while they may not be a practicing Christian, and I have no way of knowing one way or the other, but they certainly would have stronger views on some of the things that as a Christian we would stand for and against. But I guess traditionally, people would view the voting for like a party like that, so like a Family First or One Nation or any of those, Libertarian Party, whatever, any one of those, as a wasted vote, right? They would view it that way. Now, I know you have a different view of that. So tell us about that, because I think it's important that people understand how their vote is used. Yeah.
Well, that's right. It is an interesting thing to flesh out because people don't realise that when you vote for a minor party such as a Family First or the Australian Christians or the Libertarians, you're giving what's called your primary vote to them. Right. Now, if enough people vote for the minor parties, then, say, for example, I stood for Family First in the seat of Cowper. If enough people vote for me and give me their primary vote, then if I achieve 4%, then that actually means that I will receive money from the Electoral Commission for each vote that I receive. In that case, I might not actually be propelled into a seat by the number of votes that I get, but the preferences then that you list after me receiving your primary vote will then flow on to whoever you want that to go to. So as an example, you might want the LNP to get in, but you decide that you want to send them a message, and you are a social conservative, so you look for a social conservative party. Example, Australian Christians or Family First, you give them your primary vote, and then you preference the mainstream party LNP. Now, LNP ultimately will end up with your vote,
right?
But what you will penalise the mainstream party with is the primary vote. You're actually giving that to a different party.
Yeah.
So it's a financial impact at the end of the day. So the minority party is going to get money, and that money will not be going to the mainstream party, even though your vote ultimately ends up with them, right? And so that's why they will come out, the mainstream parties will come out and tell you that your primary vote is being wasted on a minority party. They're only telling you that because of the financial incentive.
It's telling you only half the story.
They just want the money from your vote. They know that ultimately they'll get your vote because of the preference system.
Right.
But here's the beauty of it. If enough people vote for a minor party, and not only do the minor party get the money for that from the Electoral Commission, but they potentially could also be able to be put into a seat.
Yes.
So particularly if you're voting for a senator who is a Family First member or Australian Christians or Libertarian, then you might be able to actually get them in power, and they might be able to stop some of this legislation that's being foisted upon us.
Isn't it really interesting? And I guess it'll be interesting to see your view on this. I mean, you look at the UK, and you had the Labour Party, which is imploding. You've got the Conservatives that are imploding, and you've got Reform, which is wiping the,
Nigel Farage.
Totally changing the map. And while he is probably not a Christian man, he certainly has conservative views, which is such appealing to the masses because they see what's happening to their country. And I guess the same thing could happen here, whether it be One Nation or whether it be some of the other smaller parties.
Well, look at the way One Nation has surged just recently, 15%.
Yeah,
some seats.
That's quite amazing, isn't it, really?
Well, they're nipping at the heels of the LNP.
Yeah.
And Labor still, is higher than One Nation, but if they were preferenced by the LNP, they'd potentially, I was reading the other day that they could win up to 6 seats in the Senate. Now, if they can win 6 seats in the Senate around Australia,
that'd be the balance of power.
Basically the balance of power.
Yeah.
Exactly right.
That's amazing. And so just going back to that point, so Christians really, when they're looking at how they would vote, they should look at who are they closest to align to in a personal values perspective. Right. All those co-issues. And then, their second preference might be the NLP, certainly not the ALP, but the NLP perhaps.
No, well, I think when you think about social conservative and conservatism, you're looking for parties that will uphold your Christian ethical and moral framework, your understanding, your standards and principles.
Yes.
Now, we don't have that in the Labor Party. We certainly don't have that in the Greens.
Yes.
And we only have a smattering of that through the LNP. And sadly, they will call themselves centrists, right-wing centrists, but they tend to be more leaning into the left and becoming quite woke. The definition, for example, of a woman, which is inscribed in the in the Act of 1998 or something that was put through by the Labor Party, describes anybody that identifies as a woman as being a woman, and the LNP uphold that.
Wow, is that ridiculous?
Well, it's just the insanity of the situation that we're in around the country today, and not just here; it's around the world.
Yeah.
And again, if we're talking about spiritual imperatives and a spiritual dimension that's informing the physical world, well, you see, okay, the madness flows from the spiritual world, and which has been governed by evil. And wants to degrade the truth of God. And so this kind of stuff gets enshrined in the laws. And really, it is madness at the end of the day, right?
Totally.
We would agree with that.
The society can't maintain itself with those sort of policies.
No, that's right. And I think that's what people see.
Yeah.
And that's why you get the rise of the Reform Party. That's why you get the rise of the Italian Prime Minister, the Hungarian Prime Minister.
Yes.
There's a move towards conservatism around the world. Donald Trump getting in the United States, just talking. I mean, he talks a lot of crazy stuff, but, he does have some common sense conservative values.
Common sense values, absolutely.
And Pauline, the same.
And that leads to, I guess, your thoughts around, Christians have in general a worldview, right? And most Christians and Christian communities, or people call themselves Christians even, have a worldview, right? And so how important is it that worldview has an influence on policy and decisions that are made in the country?
Right. Well, we're at this stage, and it's good to look at what's going on in the country of Australia today, and that is that mothers that are carrying babies to full term, the moment before they're born, those babies can be killed.
Yes, that's
in
terrible.
the womb.
Yes.
And so we're literally 10 minutes away from the baby being born as a late term. It's called late term abortion now, right? And so we have gone even further in this country into a degraded state, in that now babies that fail to be killed in the womb by being injected in the heart with a potassium solution, if those babies happen to survive the birthing process, and don't lose sight of that, the mothers are still giving birth to these babies, but they're now dead instead of alive.
Yes.
Those babies those babies that are born alive are being taken away in dishes and put into back rooms, and we have midwives coming out whistleblowing on what's going on in the hospitals in Australia. Yeah. Places of care have become places of death.
Yes.
Now, this flows from the fact that we have a worldview which is completely diametrically opposed to the Christian worldview that says that the dignity of life must be upheld at all stages, from conception to death.
Yeah.
And so that's why the Christian worldview is so fundamentally important, that we only, if you don't present righteousness to the culture and the standards of God, and provide them as a guiding post and a mooring post, if you like, for the culture and for the people in the culture, then people lean into their own sin.
It's been an amazing discussion. We've only got half into it, so we're going to come back next week and have another discussion. Peter, thanks so much for your time. It's a great discussion.
It's been a pleasure.
And guys, if you're listening, think long and hard about why your vote is important, why we as Christian men need to influence our world for the sake of babies, for the sake of older people, whoever that is. Guys, while I've got you, don't forget our website, momentumaustralia.org, and don't forget our Caroline 1-800-000-636, 1-800-000-MEN for a safe and confidential conversation. And we'll be back to continue this conversation next week.
Look forward to it.
You've been listening to Momentum, a show that helps men succeed in life. For more information or to hear this week's show again, go to momentumaustralia.org. You can also access a whole range of resources to help you on your journey, and to get in touch with the team at momentumaustralia.org.